It's evident that this city council refuses to solve the homeless crisis.
Please fully support the LDN budget. The city of Seattle cares about its children, and we must work together that no child must go to immigration court alone.
Pioneer Square needs effective solutions implemented in the short and midterm to address the challenges our neighborhood faces.
Ah, the lovely sounds of the Seattle City Council's public hearings on the 2022 budget, brought to you in full Technicolor here. We're in the middle of issue identification. You think you got issues? Well, we got plenty to discuss here, including what happens to the police department budget, especially with officers threatening to walk off the job in the midst of the city's vaccine mandate. That deadline coming up this week. We're going to discuss that political showdown. We're going to talk about a new report on homelessness and so much more here on Seattle News, Views, and Brews, your coffee break political podcast. I'm Brian Callanan. I'm a host on Seattle Channel. The views expressed here are my own. And I am with, who am I with here? Let's see if he's still on. Yeah, there we are. We got him. It's Kevin. It's Kevin Schofield.
Yeah,
Where are you, man? I know.
Hey.
I was looking around for that math is fun poster that I know you keep up in your office at all times, because we're talking budget and we're talking it all the time.
I keep it in front of me so I can look at it all the time.
I was going to say, I'm thinking of a number between 1 and 10. What is it?
All of them.
What? No. Give me I need one number.
No, we're talking city budget here. It's
so we got to go all the numbers. All the numbers are on the table. I love it. All right, math is fun, and Kevin's going to prove that to us in just a minute. Thank you, sir. Thanks also to City Grind Espresso, our background noise sponsor for the audio podcast. They are back open at City Hall. Please support them. Other businesses too. John, hang in there, buddy. We're really pulling for you, my man. Thanks also to our patrons. I'm hoping to see more of you jump on board here to support the show at the $10 level. We will send you your very own Seattle News, Views, and Brews coffee mug here. I happen to have tea in mine, but if you'd like to do that, we will get your mug shot on the show. You'll take that photo of a mug and we'll put it on the program here, like we will for our patron, Emma, who sends in this photo, our mug shot of the week. Yes, indeed, those autumn days are upon us. These mugs are excellent for coffee, gathering fall foliage. Please do become a patron. We'll get your photo on the show here. Support us at the $10 level on Patreon. Also, thanks to Converge Media. Converge airs the video version of our podcast on their YouTube channel Wednesday nights at 7. All right, off we go with right here, right now. All right, to begin, a very important deadline this week, October 18th. The vaccine mandate set in place by Governor Inslee for state workers. Mayor Jenny Durkin set a similar mandate for city workers, Dow Constantine for workers at the county level too. So, Kevin, we touched on this last week. Hundreds of police officers and firefighters have either not been vaccinated or not turned in their vaccine paperwork. What do you see happening on October 18th? I know this is very tough to determine here, but will hundreds of cops and firefighters actually walk off the job? What do you think?
Well, first of all, let's put that in context. There's hundreds of workers a couple of weeks before the deadline, right?
Right.
You know, nobody, you and I, nobody else around here is deadline driven, right? So,
right. Okay.
So, you know, I think we as of the time we're recording this, we don't have data as to, you know, what the final number is going to be, but I expect it's going to be, you know, the percentage of police officers and fire department officials and other city and county and state employees who haven't gotten vaccinated. It's going to be a lot lower than the couple of hundred that it was a couple of weeks ago. You know, I think we're going to see a few things. First of all, you know, let's keep in mind also that vaccine mandates aren't new, right?
Right.
They've been around for hundreds of years, particularly in schools, but they've been around for a long time. So, you know, it's more politicized this time than it has been in the past, but it's definitely not new. You know, I think it's instructive to look at what's going on with the King County Sheriff's Department, right? Okay. Where even last week, the sheriff instructed deputies and other office employees who had not met the deadline that they're expected to come into the office anyway, because you know public employees have a certain process that they have to go through before they can be fired, right?
I see. Okay.
This thing called the Loudermill hearing, which we talked about a month ago with regard to city employees.
Yes, right.
And so what the sheriff has said is we still expect you to come into the office on the 18th, and we'll talk to you about scheduling a Loudermill hearing. We'll go through that. So it isn't necessarily going to be an immediate firing. My guess is for anybody who's at least partially vaccinated, we'll probably give them some opportunity, some grace period to finish that out, just in
Okay.
practice,
Mm-hmm.
and also in practice, it's not like they, can schedule a Loudermill hearing for the same afternoon, right? Because their unions representing, they have to get involved because they can represent them at the Loudermill. It's like, there's going to be a bunch of process. It's not like instantly. It's, we have heard that, both the Seattle Fire Department and the Police Department are putting contingency plans in place, right? Police Department is moving to what's called Stage 3 operations, in which all their plainclothes officers, the detectives, investigative officers, and things like that, are all going to have to show up in uniform so they can be deployed on the streets if they need to. So there's some steps being taken. I don't think we have good data yet about what it's really going to look like and how big of an issue it's going to be.
Right, and a lot of it hidden behind this different union negotiation piece, which is happening. But I did want to touch on one thing that I thought might be a piece of this. I don't know if there's any city budget planning going on behind this, saying, wait a minute, if we lose some more officers or firefighters, do we have to move on to that? Do you have an idea about that one? Because I have to think it's in the back of a few city council members' minds.
They have not built that into any of the plans so far. Right.
Yeah.
But the budget isn't done until the end of November, so they'll have a good month to incorporate that if they feel like that is an issue. But again, I think it may in practice turn out to be a short-term furlough for a bunch of officers. Because any officer who wants to stay in law enforcement is going to have the same issue.
That's right.
Going to the vast majority of law enforcement agencies across the country.
Right. And I did want to make sure I brought up one important storyline behind all of this. When July rolled around and President Biden called on more agencies and businesses to put vaccine mandates in place, the number of unvaccinated people in the U.S. dropped from 97 million to 66 million. And we've also seen the caseloads, the COVID deaths dropping too. I think there's at least a little bit of an upside here beyond the controversy when it comes to vaccinations and our country getting healthier, Kevin.
Yeah, the vaccine mandates are working. They're absolutely working, right? We're getting more people vaccinated. You look at all the numbers of caseloads, and the daily new cases is dropping like a rock, which is fantastic news, right?
Yeah, and I think there has to be a correlation there. So we'll see what happens this week as that October 18th deadline rolls around. But I thank you for that breakdown there. I want to tackle some more budget questions in just a minute. We're definitely going to talk more about the SPD. But first, let's talk about some new legislation that Councilmember Sawant is at least talking about. Hasn't put it on paper yet, but talking about requiring construction companies to pay for parking for their workers near job sites, since these workers are bringing in tools, etc. So the backstory here: last month, the Northwest Carpenters Union, which was on strike at the time, told Councilmember Sawant she was going too far when she spoke out about their labor dispute. She was grabbing the limelight for her political agenda, etc. There, the union said, "Hey, Councilmember Sawant, what we really need is help with our parking rates." So now the strike is over. The union has higher wages and an increase in its hourly parking pay in certain areas of Seattle and Bellevue. But these unions are asking for parking to be paid in full, and they're really pushing Councilmember Sawant to do that, it sounds like.
I don't think they have to push Sawant very hard to do this, right? It's a national issue for her to jump on. You mentioned the Carpenters just got a new contract. That contract includes an increase up to $1.50 per hour for parking, right? And the reason they need parking is because carpenters aren't provided tools on the job site. They have to bring their own tools, right? So bringing big heavy toolboxes on city buses or light rail it's problematic. It's not easy for them to do. There are some sites where there's just no parking, where the construction company will set up an off-site parking area and then provide transportation into the site and out at the end of the day. So the draft bill that Councilmember Sawant has put forward says that that parking has to be paid for entirely, nearby to the site by the construction company, or they need to pay for transportation, all the cost of transportation from some off-site place to the construction site and back. I think this, when you look at what's going on between the city council and unions, I think it's interesting to sort of put that in a larger context, because this is another case, for better or for worse, and you could argue it's a good thing, you argue it's a bad thing, where unions have tried to negotiate things with employers. They've not gotten everything they want, and then they've turned to the city council to legislate what they couldn't get.
Right.
So, hotel workers.
Same.
Right?
Yeah.
Hotel workers, healthcare, and a bunch of other benefits. They could not get those at the bargaining table, and then they twisted the arm of the city council legislative for them.
Yeah. Not too far, but yeah, keep going. Yeah.
Yeah. We've seen similar things with, minimum wage for TNC workers.
Yes.
We've seen this, there've been some other recent cases, and this is the latest case of this. So,
right.
Is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? It's, I think, I don't talk a lot about elections, but I think in the context of how much labor money is being poured into supporting particular candidates.
Yeah.
I think, you can see very clearly what they're buying.
Yeah.
You're buying a city council that will go legislate the things that they couldn't negotiate. And arguably, some of those things are necessary and they're important for public safety and public health and worker protection.
Sure.
But where do you draw the line? Right?
That's what I was going to say. When it's like, okay, let's help out the hotel workers. Let's help out the construction workers. I know there are other workers out there.
Hazard pay for grocery workers.
Right, grocery workers too. Good point.
Is that, is legislating compensation, over the line, right? Versus healthcare, right? That has, public health. These are hard policy questions. I'm definitely not advocating that there is a right or wrong answer to this, right?
No.
It's a very, very difficult policy question that's tied up in a lot of the politics and a lot of the political money in the city.
Yeah, no, millions I know poured into the different council races, the mayor's race this year, city attorney's race too, for that matter.
And to be fair to the other side as well, employers are pouring a lot of money into it.
Business
too, right?
dollars are rolling there too.
We're going to end up again with the best elected officials money can buy, right? And it's this kind of issue that's driving it on both sides. All that money going into it.
Yeah, very divisive one on a few different levels. All right, well, let's talk about the budget mysteries of the Seattle Police Department revealed. That's next on Now Hear This. All right, we are talking budget, and we're talking about the Seattle Police Department. You may recall a couple of months ago, as I set this up, end of August, a rash of shootings across the city, a few fatalities involved there too. At which point, Interim Chief Diaz held a press conference to talk about the challenges he is facing, especially when it comes to staffing. He noted that the SPD has lost nearly 300 officers since the middle of 2020, and that he'd like to get back to where the department was in 2019, when it had about 1,400 sworn officers.
We have drastically dropped down the amount of officers that we have over the last year and a half, and I would say that we need that original amount of about 1,400 officers to really be able to not only staff patrol and then take a proactive stance and also be able to engage community.
Kevin, we have heard statements like this from Chief Diaz over the past several months here, and I really do want to use this as a launching point into the numbers behind the SPD budget, because headcount is really the major issue to consider here when breaking this down.
Yeah, and the headcount going into next year, there's a staffing plan for SPD.
Right.
They expect to, on net, hire an increase in, end the year with an increase in 35 officers.
Right.
They have a plan that says they're going to hire 125,
and hopefully net that
they expect to lose 90, so net 35.
Yep.
And it's a big theoretical. They're guessing on both sides, and they don't really know where it's going to end up. They could get more lateral hires and could hire a little bit more. Attrition could 90 attrition is lower than they've had for the last couple of years.
Right.
Are they really going to lower it? And there are a couple of things that they want to do to be able to help with this. One of the proposals in the SPD budget is $1 million for incentive bonuses for hiring. Which is something that the city council is not going to be terribly happy about.
I know Councilmember Herbold's already been pushing back on that idea, saying, hey, there's other city departments that maybe they could use some hiring bonuses too. But keep going, because this whole idea of the different things that are in this budget are a big part of the headcount issue.
Yeah, and so altogether, given looking at going to 2022 compared to a year ago, there's significantly fewer officers, and they've had some attrition in other parts of the civilian part of SPD as well.
True.
And they expect altogether about $19 million of salary savings versus last year. Now, interestingly, most of that they're proposing stays, that salary savings stays in the department.
Right.
Some of it they would need for things like event overtime because they drastically reduced that last year because of all the events that were canceled because of the pandemic. And now they're expecting to have a return of much larger number of events, including more potentially than pre-pandemic because of the addition of the Seattle Kraken. We've got an NHL team as well that'll be playing a bunch of games. So that's a piece of it. They've got this $1 million for hiring bonuses. They've got some more technology projects they're trying to cover to help them sort of mitigate the issues around having fewer officers. They are proposing spinning out $3.5 million of that to put into continuing funding for some of the alternatives to policing investments that they've made over the last year and a half. And and a few other things that they're doing. So that's certainly going to be an issue with the city council, who's going to want to take some more of that salary savings and apply it to other things. So there's going to be a bit of a fight over that. And then when you get sort of deeper and look at how is Chief Diaz trying to deploy the officers that he has, his priority, and he's been very clear about this for a year and a half, is to keep patrol staffing as high as possible.
He's talking about patrols up here, maybe not investigation so much, but
investigations. He has definitely deprioritized investigations. There's a fairly significant drop in personnel in investigations as he tries to move, and sustain. And he has not in this plan entirely sustained patrol headcount. He has in fact not only sustained it but grown it in the South Precinct. But the other ones are all seen a bit of a drop. And the South Precinct, that's an interesting, maybe that's a good thing, maybe that's a bad thing, right? There's certainly been, some violent crime issues in the South Precinct, as well as the East Precinct, West Precinct downtown, and other places around the city as well. If you, on the other hand, believe that that SPD over polices certain areas of the city, South Precinct is certainly one of those areas where there have been accusations of over policing, or maybe just over policing of small crimes,
of minor crimes.
So, is having more police officers in the South Precinct necessarily a good thing? There's a real policy debate over that as well. And very differing views. On whether that's a good thing or not.
I wanted to make sure I pulled out one piece here, Kevin, because very importantly, there are a number of personnel that have been pulled out of the Seattle PD. And I'm talking about the 911 call center specifically. I'm thinking of, and parking enforcement as well. You pull out those pieces here, I think that makes for a different picture too. And that's kind of part of this puzzle for the budget as well.
So 260 positions came out, 140 from the parking enforcement officers and 120 from the 911 call center. Those moved to other departments in the city. Parking enforcement officers went to SDOT, 911 call center went to the new Community Safety and Communications Center. So that, is a reduction in headcount and dollars for SPD's budget, though interestingly enough, SPD's overall dollar budget is about flat because there are some cost of living increases. Inflation has been high over the last year, So there's some adjustments that have to go into that. And it's also important to remember that parking enforcement officers and 911 dispatchers are on the low end of the pay scale for SPD.
Okay. Good
point. So if you take 260 of the lower paid personnel out of a department, it has less of a monetary effect than if you take 260 of the highest paid people out of the department.
Okay. I guess I did want to pull apart that one piece because it looks like in terms of what the mayor wants to spend for 2022, she's talking about $365 million or so. 2021, it was $363 million. But then I think about that, those different personnel that have been pulled out into the call center or pulled out for parking enforcement, whatever else. Why does it stay flat? That was an interesting deep dive you did in SCC Insight, and I thought it was interesting to see just how SPOG and the union for the bulk of the officers within the SPD has really been pushing for some higher wages over the years, and they've got them, and that's a part of this puzzle too.
That doesn't make the SPOG contract in some ways doesn't make a big difference between 2021 and 2022 because the officers are working without a contract at the moment. They're not getting raises on that, but there are other parts of their compensation package like healthcare, and healthcare has definitely gotten more expensive over the last year, right?
Sure,
so
makes sense.
That's a place where even without a new contract, the per person expenses for the department are still going up, right?
Okay.
So there's that. There's a lot of, across every department in the city, there's some centrally managed things like HR and IT and, vehicle fleets and things like this, where they're run in separate departments in the city, but then they bill back all the different departments. So, and there have been increased costs for IT, for HR, for healthcare, for, fleet management, all those things. Those bill backs, those chargebacks to different departments all get increased every year. Well, most years anyway. And they definitely all get increased going into 2022. So again, even without a compensation increase in dollars for individual police officers, just the expenses related to having employees in a department are going up.
I guess I wanted to try to look ahead, and you had mentioned a few things the council is going to be taking a close look at. The salary savings there, where does that go exactly? Are they talking about hiring bonuses potentially? But are there other ideas that the council might be looking at? Maybe transferring other groups like parking enforcement, whatever else, like they did with that. Are there other groups they could transfer out of SPD, or where do you see the council really going after it with this budget and trying to pull apart some of these different pieces here?
Yeah, there's one group within SPD that there's been for the last year and a half continued conversation about should they move out to community safety communication center as well. Yeah. And that is the community safety officers.
Right.
Instead of civilian officer, I wouldn't even say officers, civilian personnel who can sort of provide support for sworn officers to do things like, go take crime reports and do a lot of engagement with the community that free up police officers to go, be in places where we really need somebody with a badge and a gun.
Right.
And in fact, the proposal on the table is to add another unit of CSOs, probably another 6-7 people in the 2022 budget to do that. And again, that's, one more piece of why the budget overall stayed flat.
I see.
But there has been debate, and there are members of the city council that have been pushing hard for saying, hey, maybe that's the next group to move out of SPD. But they've asked the CSOs, and the CSOs are very insistent that they want to stay in SPD. So moving them out would basically go against their own wishes. They think that they're getting advantages from being in the department, including things like having easier access to all the data in their IT systems.
Right.
So when they're interacting with people, they can go look up data and things like that. If they're outside the department, that's going to be a little harder to do.
Right. It's interesting to watch this Community Safety and Communication Center get off the ground and hopefully achieve some sort of legitimacy there, because I can see those CSOs' perspective. It's just like, wait a minute, totally new department. We don't even know what that place is all about. Rather stick with what we know, I guess, is kind of where they're coming from.
And this is beyond, as far as the CSCC is beyond SPD as well, right? So, one of the things that the mayor's proposed in her budget for 2022 is this new Triage 1 unit.
Yeah. Right.
And that she has proposed would go into the fire department, which is, it's understandable because it has a lot of overlap with the EMTs.
Yes,
and
the medical needs there, right.
And with the, other units that they've actually spun up over the last couple of years to provide kind of support for what they call low acuity cases, incidents that happen. It kind of fits really pretty well in that spectrum. But there have been suggestions that perhaps that should be in the CSCC as well. Right? It'd be more expensive to do that because a lot of the infrastructure the fire department has already put in place to support these other, mobile triage units and other units to deal with this whole spectrum of cases rather than roll a big fire truck to every, call you get along 3rd Avenue. They would have to basically recreate and duplicate a bunch of that infrastructure within CSCC. So there are costs and logistical advantages to having within the fire department. But you raise a good point. And this is a point that Councilmember Herbold and some other council members have started to raise, which is, are we serious about the CSCC thing or not?
Right. If so,
are we really, as we continue to spin up new, alternatives to policing, some of which are going to be community based,
Yes.
some of which are going to be city employees.
It would make
Are
sense.
we going to continue to find excuses not to put the city employee ones in CSCC?
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. That's going to be very interesting to see how that gets off the ground. And I know there's a ton more to talk about with the police budget. Folks, let's do this. Make sure you go to SCC Insight and check out this deep dive that Kevin did on this. You can also see the council's memo on it, some of the different agenda items they're going to be working through as they look at this. But this is going to be fascinating in the weeks ahead. Kevin, I thank you very much for that. We're going to move on to a new report to bring you on homelessness here. Spoiler alert, Seattle's got a crisis that has become worse during the pandemic. Well, we're going to hear all about it in What's Next. So, Kevin, I wanted to highlight a report Councilmember Lewis came out with last week. He asked Council Central staff to break down what's been happening with our homelessness crisis during the COVID pandemic. And yes, it's clearly gotten worse, but some of the numbers really jumped out at me because as much as critics like to focus on, hey, these people refuse shelter or whatever else, I saw this one piece in the report that showed there are 2.5 times more requests for shelter than the city can accommodate. What did that say to you?
Well, and this is something we've been hearing in many ways as part of the fight between the city council and the mayor, is that it's been a really slow year to roll out new shelter resources.
Yes.
And the city council put a bunch of money in the budget for tiny home villages, other kinds of shelter. And it's just been, for a variety of reasons, it's been slow to roll out. Yeah. And the city council has gotten pretty angry at times about this and accused the mayor of dragging her feet on tiny home villages. But what the executive branch is now saying is that between now and the end of the year, there's going to be hundreds of new units, new shelter beds between various kinds of shelter and tiny home villages that are showing up. So everyone is crossing their fingers that between now and December 31st, we're going to have an opportunity to really help a lot of people get off the streets and into a better place. Yeah.
And Councilmember Lewis also pointed out there will be about 2,000 more housing units for people who are homeless by the year 2023, a 47% increase from 2019, which seems like a big jump. But I wonder about this, Kevin, with the rise of the Regional Homelessness Authority, which is coming online at the start of the year, is the city trying to jam a bunch of stuff through before they have to cede a little bit more of this authority to the RHA? Do you see that dynamic at all, or what do you think?
I don't think it's trying to jam stuff through. I do think, one of the issues that we're going to have is the city council in particular is much more excited about tiny home villages than the Regional Homeless Authority. But it's not just the Regional Homeless Authority, right? What they call the Lived Experience Coalition, which is sort of an advocacy group, represented by people who are formerly homeless. Has also really raised some skepticism about such an emphasis on tiny home villages, which they called, look, they're not homes, they're sheds. Right. That's not my description of it. That's their description of it.
Yes.
There are advantages to tiny homes. It's 4 walls. You can, there's a lock on the door, so you've got some privacy. You've got a place to store your stuff that's secure during the day. You've got electricity and some heat. So there are advantages to it. But it isn't by many folks' definitions, it really isn't still a home. So as we talked about before, there's this ongoing issue of are these sort of a temporary waypoint on the path to getting into better housing, or is this something that people are going to end up in for a lot of years? And if it's the latter, then there's some real concerns that we should be having about what we're doing with this.
Right. And interesting to see in some of the language that I've seen from, I think it was the mayor's proposal, calling them tiny home villages rather than tiny house villages. A very subtle difference there, but it's kind of goes to what we're talking about there.
And the advocacy organizations who, let's be honest, like to fight over words around this stuff. This has been an ongoing fight, and it's been an ongoing fight among the lawyers as well, right? Because there are legal implications for saying that something is someone's home, because the U.S. Constitution makes guarantees about privacy and security within someone's home.
Got it.
Right. Yeah. So there were, court cases about homeless individuals living in tents.
Sure.
Who have, they end up in the briefs calling them houseless.
Yes,
and
right.
arguing that their tent is their home because that would confer a whole bunch of constitutional protections on that. Wow. So it starts with that.
Yeah.
But now it gets into this other question of like, how are we thinking about these spaces, right?
Oh man, yeah.
Right.
Well, I'm looking forward to more on that debate, and I'm looking forward to see all these different things that Councilmember Lewis is talking about in his report unfold. But doggone it, it's time to wrap up the show. But when we do wrap up our podcast, our coffee break political podcast, we always try to bring you a taste of something good to have with that mug of Java. And Kevin, I will display to you. My daughter made some pumpkin bread, a little bit of oatmeal on the top, right?
Pumpkin bread.
It's the good stuff. Now this stuff is delicious. I got to tell you that. But I wanted to ask the question, when does bread stop being bread and become cake? Because this is delicious. It tastes pretty sweet. I'm like, that feels like cake to me. What do you think on that one? The cake versus bread debate. Your thoughts?
Added sugar.
Yeah.
Added sugar.
I guess that's what it is, huh?
Added sugar, right?
But you can still call it, can I still call this bread? I mean, this is a pretty awesome sugary treat. There's even some chocolate chips in there, as it turns out. Is this still a bread? I mean, what have I got here?
I have to look at the recipe, but
oh boy, okay, I have to go to the tape.
There are countries like France and Italy that actually have regulations about what you can call different kinds. And, there are regulations like that in terms of packaging on foods and grocery stores.
Right. Okay.
But, beyond that, in the United States, we're not very big on, regulations that say this is bread and that is not bread.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of like when they called the hot dog a sandwich a couple years ago. It's like, what are you even saying right now? It's these are important questions, though. I mean,
you really think you're fooling anybody? Come on, it's a hot dog.
Right. I don't know. Well, I'm going to eat it. If it's cake or bread, it is. It's good for you, too. I'll make sure I get you a slice at some point. Thank you, Kevin, as always, for joining in the conversation here. Thank you also to our patrons. Thanks to everybody out there listening. It's Seattle News, Views, and Brews, where you can always find out what's brewing in local politics. Subscribe on iTunes or Spotify, why don't you, wherever you tune in. Again, please do become a patron on Patreon. If you like what you're hearing, we could always use your support. Thanks also for watching on Converge Media 2. We will see you next time. Seattle News, Views, and Brews is an independent production of Callanan Media Services. Copyright 2021.